The thunder of hooves shook the earth like a living earthquake as Abigail Anderson ran for her life, the massive cloud of dust behind her growing closer with each desperate step. Arizona Territory, 1878, a year that had promised new beginnings but might now mark her end as hundreds of stampeding cattle bore down upon her on the outskirts of Prescott. Move. The command cut through the air like a whip crack, followed by the pounding of a single horse breaking away from the chaos. Abigail had just enough time to turn her head, strands of copper hair whipping across her face, before strong arms swept her upward in one fluid motion. Her body left the ground as the cowboy pulled her onto his saddle without his mount ever breaking stride. "Hold tight," he shouted over the roar, his voice deep and steady despite the danger at their heels. Abigail clutched at his worn leather vest, her fingers digging into the fabric as the horse surged forward, its powerful muscles straining to outrun the wall of horned beasts behind them. The cowboy guided his mount with subtle shifts of his weight, one arm wrapped securely around Abigail's waist as they raced across the open range. The thunderous noise gradually faded as they put distance between themselves and the stampede, but he didn't slow their pace until they reached the protection of a shallow ravine. Only when they were safely out of the path of destruction did the horse slow to a trot, sides heaving from exertion. The cowboy's hold on her loosened, but Abigail found herself reluctant to let go of the stranger who had just saved her life. "You all right, miss?" he asked, the brim of his dust-covered hat tilting down as he looked at her. Abigail nodded, her heart still pounding wildly in her chest. "Yes, thanks to you." She shifted to get a better look at her rescuer and found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue, weathered at the corners from years of squinting against the harsh Arizona sun. "Daniel Wade," he offered, a slight nod accompanying his introduction. "Most folks just call me Wade." "Abigail Anderson," she replied, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. I had no idea they were coming. One moment I was collecting specimens and the next." Her voice trailed off as she glanced back toward the dust cloud still visible in the distance. Wade's expression darkened. "Rustlers, most likely, been hitting ranches all through the territory. Spook the herd, create chaos, then cut away the stragglers." He helped her adjust her position on the saddle. "What brings a lady botanist out here alone, if you don't mind my asking?" Abigail's eyebrows rose in surprise. "How did you know I was collecting botanical specimens?" A hint of a smile touched his lips as he nodded toward the satchel still miraculously strapped across her body. Several pressed plants and small glass vials were visible through the open flap. "My sister had similar interests," he explained. "Recognized the tools of the trade." "Had?" Abigail asked, then immediately regretted the question when a shadow passed over his features. "Fever took her 3 winters ago," he said simply, then changed the subject. "Where are you staying? I should get you back before anyone starts worrying." "The Wilcox boarding house in Prescott," she answered. "I arrived just 2 days ago from Boston. The university sent me to catalog the indigenous flora of the territory." Wade nodded, gently clicking his tongue to urge his horse forward. "That's a fair distance." "We won't make it before dark, especially with Samson here needing rest after that run. My camp's not far. You can spend the night there, and I'll get you back to town at first light tomorrow." Abigail hesitated. Proper Boston society would be scandalized at the very thought of her spending a night alone with a strange man, no matter the circumstances. Yet she was far from Boston now, and this man had just saved her life. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Wade. Thank you." "Just Wade," he corrected, guiding the horse along a narrow game trail. "Mr. Wade was my father, and I never much cared for him." They rode in comfortable silence as the landscape changed, the open plain giving way to scattered juniper and pinyon pine. The sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds when Wade finally guided his horse into a small clearing nestled against a rocky outcropping. "It's not much," he said as he helped Abigail dismount, his hands steady at her waist. "But it's sheltered from the wind and has a good water source." A small lean-to had been constructed against the rock face, with a fire pit surrounded by stones in the center of the clearing. Various supplies were neatly stacked beneath the shelter, and a second horse, a sturdy pinto, was picketed nearby. "It's perfect," Abigail assured him, stretching her legs after the long ride. Her skirts were torn and covered in dust, and she was certain her hair looked frightful, but she was alive and oddly at ease in this wild place with this quiet man. Wade set about caring for his horse, removing the saddle and bridle with practiced efficiency. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll get a fire going." Abigail watched him work, noting the economy of his movements. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. He was lean but powerfully built, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met the collar of his shirt. His face was clean-shaven, unusual for men in these parts, with strong features that spoke of both hardship and determination. "Have you been in the territory long?" she asked, gathering her courage to engage this taciturn man in conversation. Wade nodded as he arranged kindling in the fire pit. "Since '65. Came west after the war looking for something different. You fought in the war between the states." Abigail sat on a flat rock near the fire pit, her curiosity piqued. "Union cavalry," he confirmed, striking a match against a rock. "Entered as a boy, came out. Different." The flame caught, and he carefully nurtured it until the kindling began to burn steadily. "Most of us did." There was a wealth of untold story in those few words, and Abigail felt a pang of sympathy for whatever horrors this man had witnessed in his youth. "My father was too old to fight, but my eldest brother served. He never spoke of it after he returned." Wade nodded in understanding. "Some things are better left in the past." He stood and dusted off his hands. "I have coffee and some jerky. Not much of a supper, I'm afraid." "It sounds wonderful," Abigail assured him, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. "Please, let me help." Together they prepared a simple meal, supplemented by dried fruit that Abigail had in her satchel. As darkness fell, and the stars emerged in breathtaking profusion overhead, they sat by the fire sharing the food and cautiously learning about one another. Abigail told him about her work at the university, her specialization in medicinal plants, and her excitement at being selected for this expedition, despite the resistance from her male colleagues. Wade listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp intelligence beneath his reserved exterior. In turn, he shared bits of his own life, how he'd worked as a ranch hand, a scout for the army, and now as a freelance tracker and guide. He spoke of the land with reverence, describing hidden canyons and ancient ruins that few white eyes had seen. "Tomorrow I'll take you back to Prescott," he said as they finished their coffee, "but you shouldn't be wandering the territory alone. It's not just stampedes you need to worry about out here." Abigail bristled slightly at the implied criticism. "I'm not without resources, Mr. Wade. I've traveled extensively for my work." "Back east, maybe," he acknowledged, "but the Arizona Territory plays by different rules." Apache raids still happen despite what the Army tells folks in town, and there are white men just as dangerous roaming these parts. Before Abigail could respond, a distant howl echoed through the night, followed by several answering calls. Wade's expression softened as he noted her startled reaction. "Just coyotes," he explained. They won't bother us. Abigail nodded, though she found herself moving slightly closer to the fire and to Wade. It's very different from Boston, she admitted. You'll get used to the sounds, he said, adding another piece of wood to the fire. Eventually, you might even miss them when they're not there. He arranged his bedroll beneath the lean-to and insisted she take it, despite her protests. I'll keep watch by the fire, he said firmly. Get some rest. We'll head out at first light. Abigail finally acquiesced, too exhausted to argue further. The bedroll smelled of leather, tobacco, and something uniquely weighed a clean, outdoor scent that was oddly comforting. Despite the hard ground beneath her and the strange sounds of the wilderness around them, she found herself drifting toward sleep, feeling safer than she had any right to in such circumstances. Her last conscious thought was of storm-gray eyes and strong arms lifting her above danger. Perhaps Arizona held more wonders than just the botanical discoveries she had come to find. Morning came with the soft calls of mourning doves and the gentle rustling of Wade moving around the camp. Abigail opened her eyes to find him already preparing coffee, his back to her as he worked silently in the pre-dawn light. "Good morning," she said, her voice slightly hoarse from sleep. He turned, and for a brief moment, she caught an unguarded expression on his face, something warm and almost tender, before his features settled back into their customary reserve. "Morning," he replied. "Sleep well." Abigail sat up, aware of her rumpled appearance but too practical to be overly concerned about it. "Better than I expected to," she admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Wade nodded, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth up Abigail's arm that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. They broke camp efficiently, Wade packing his supplies with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to life on the move. Abigail helped where she could, grateful for tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind distracted from thoughts of their impending parting. The ride to Prescott took several hours, during which Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to her silent companion. Wade pointed out various plants along the way, surprising her with his knowledge of their local names and uses. When she commented on this, he shrugged. "Learned from the Yavapai and some from the Mexican vaqueros," he explained. "Out here, knowing what can heal you or kill you is just good sense." As they approached the outskirts of town, Abigail felt a curious reluctance to return to civilization. The past 24 hours had been frightening and uncomfortable, yet also exhilarating in ways she hadn't anticipated. "I need to continue my research," she said suddenly as the first buildings came into view. "But I understand your point about the dangers of traveling alone." Wade glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Are you suggesting something, Miss Anderson?" "Abigail, please," she corrected. "And yes, I suppose I am. Would you consider serving as my guide? The university has allocated funds for local assistance. You know the territory, and you've already demonstrated your ability to keep me alive in difficult circumstances." A hint of amusement flickered across his features. "Not much call for botany guides in my usual line of work." "All the more reason to diversify your skills," Abigail countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "I would compensate you fairly, of course." Wade was silent for a long moment as they rode down the main street of Prescott, drawing curious glances from townsfolk, unaccustomed to seeing a dusty, disheveled woman sharing a horse with one of the territory's most solitary men. "I'll consider it," he finally said as they reached the boarding house. "Got some business to attend to first. Cattle rustlers don't track themselves." Abigail nodded, trying to hide her disappointment as he helped her dismount. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly, finding herself briefly pressed against his chest. She looked up to thank him and found his face just inches from her own, those storm-gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed to say, "for everything." "Take care of yourself, Abigail Anderson," he replied softly, then stepped back and mounted his horse in one fluid motion. With a tip of his hat, he turned and rode away, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her heart beating uncomfortably fast. Mrs. Wilcox, the boarding house proprietor, was full of questions and exclamations over Abigail's bedraggled state. But Abigail offered only the briefest explanation, before retreating to her room for a much-needed bath and change of clothes. As she soaked in the lukewarm water, she found her thoughts continually returning to Daniel Wade and the strange connection she felt to this man she barely knew. 3 days passed with no word from Wade. Abigail kept herself busy organizing her specimens and making cautious excursions to the garden behind the boarding house and the nearby town square. Mrs. Wilcox had been adamant that she not venture beyond the town limits alone after hearing of her close call, and Abigail reluctantly complied, chafing at the restriction but understanding its prudence. On the 4th morning, as she sat at breakfast in the boarding house dining room, the front door opened to admit a tall figure that immediately drew every eye in the room. Wade stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking surprisingly presentable in a clean shirt and vest. His dark hair was damp and neatly combed, and he'd clearly visited a barber, his jaw smooth and a few inches trimmed from his hair. Conversations faltered as he scanned the room, his gaze finally settling on Abigail. With a slight nod, he approached her table. "Miss Anderson," he greeted her formally, aware of the curious eyes watching them. "I wonder if I might have a word." Abigail gestured to the empty chair across from her, keenly conscious of the whispers already circulating among the other boarders. "Please join me." Wade sat, placing his hat on the empty chair beside him. Up close, Abigail could see that his knuckles were scraped and a fading bruise shadowed his right cheekbone, evidence that his business with the cattle rustlers had not been entirely peaceful. "I've given your proposal some thought," he said without preamble. "I'm amenable to serving as your guide under certain conditions." Abigail leaned forward slightly, her breakfast forgotten. "What conditions?" "First, we establish clear boundaries about where it's safe to travel and when. Some areas are off limits, no matter how interesting the plants might be." His tone left no room for negotiation on this point. "Second, you follow my lead without question if we encounter trouble. No hesitation, no debate." Abigail nodded, finding these terms reasonable given the circumstances. "And third," a hint of something softer flickered in his eyes. "Third, you teach me about your work, the science behind what you're studying. I've got practical knowledge, but I'd like to understand the why of it all." This unexpected request surprised and pleased her. "Of course," she agreed readily. "I'd be happy to share what I know." "Then we have an arrangement," Wade concluded, extending his hand across the table. Abigail took it without hesitation, feeling the rough calluses against her palm and the gentle strength in his grip. "When can we start?" "I've secured a wagon and supplies," he replied. "We can leave tomorrow morning if that suits you." "It does," she assured him, already mentally cataloging what she would need to pack. Wade nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll meet you here at sunrise." He rose to leave, then hesitated. "One more thing, Miss Anderson. People will talk about you traveling with a man who isn't family. Are you prepared for that?" Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Wade, I've endured far worse scrutiny for pursuing a scientific career as a woman. Small-town gossip holds no terror for me." A genuine smile broke across his face then, transforming his features and causing Abigail's heart to execute an unexpected flip in her chest. "Good," he said simply, and with a nod, he departed, leaving Abigail to face the immediately renewed whispers and the knowing look from Mrs. Wilcox. True to his word, Wade arrived just as dawn was breaking the next morning. The wagon was well provisioned, with a canvas cover to provide shade and protection from the elements. Abigail's equipment was carefully stowed, and a spare mount, a gentle-eyed mare, was tethered to the back. "The mare's for you," Wade explained as they set out. "Thought you might want to learn to ride properly while we're out here. Wagon can't go everywhere the plants grow." Over the next several weeks, Abigail discovered a whole new world under Wade's guidance. They traveled along creek beds, into hidden valleys, and across windswept mesas. Each location offered new botanical treasures for Abigail to document, sketch, and collect. Wade proved an invaluable companion, not just for his knowledge of the territory and its dangers, but for his unexpected insights into the local flora. He knew which plants the indigenous peoples used for medicine, which for ceremonies, and which to avoid entirely. This practical knowledge complemented Abigail's scientific approach perfectly. In return, Abigail shared her understanding of plant structures, evolutionary adaptations, and classification systems. Wade absorbed this information with an intelligence that continually surprised her, asking questions that revealed a deeply curious mind beneath his stoic exterior. They developed a comfortable routine as the days passed. Wade would hunt or fish for their dinner, while Abigail prepared and documented her specimens. In the evenings, they would sit by the campfire, talking long into the night about everything and nothing: his experiences during the war, her struggles in the male-dominated world of academia, books they had read, places they had seen. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the nature of their relationship began to shift. Abigail found herself watching Wade when he wasn't looking, the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he handled the horses, the rare but transformative smile that would occasionally light his features, the gentleness with which he treated every living thing despite his rugged capability. For his part, Wade grew more attentive and protective, his customary reserve softening around the edges. He began to anticipate her needs before she voiced them, remembering which plants she was especially interested in finding, ensuring she had the best light for her sketching. Little kindnesses that spoke volumes from a man of few words. One evening, as they made camp near a small spring, Abigail was absorbed in pressing a particularly delicate specimen when Wade returned from hunting. He paused several yards away, simply watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "What is it?" she asked, looking up to find his eyes on her. "You look right out here," he said quietly. "Most Eastern folks never settle into the rhythm of this place. They fight against it, try to bend it to their will, but you—" He shook his head slightly. "You belong here as much as any of these plants you're collecting." The simple observation touched Abigail deeply. "I feel that way," she admitted. "I've never experienced such a sense of freedom before. Back home, there are always so many constraints, so many expectations." Wade nodded, coming to sit beside her. "Freedom's what drew most of us here. That and running from something, I suppose." "What were you running from?" Abigail asked, setting aside her work to give him her full attention. Wade was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Memories, mostly. Things I did during the war, things I saw." He looked up at the darkening sky. "Thought the open spaces out here might make them seem smaller, less important." "Did it work?" Abigail's question was gentle, free of judgment. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not at first, but lately. Yes, Some things seemed to matter less than they used to. Their eyes met in the fading light, and Abigail felt something unspoken pass between them, a recognition, an understanding that transcended words. Wade reached out slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his calloused fingers brushed a strand of copper hair from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear. "Abigail," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Wade pulled back, glancing at the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming. We should secure the camp." Together they prepared for the approaching weather, working in seamless coordination born of weeks in each other's company. As the first heavy drops began to fall, they took shelter beneath the wagon's canvas cover, huddled among their supplies as lightning flashed across the sky and thunder shook the earth. In the close confines of their shelter, with rain drumming on the canvas above them, Abigail was acutely aware of Wade beside her, the warmth of his body, the rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and pine that always seemed to surround him. "Tell me about Boston," he said suddenly. "What will you do when you return?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so absorbed in their current journey that she had given little thought to its inevitable conclusion. "Continue my research, I suppose. Write papers, give lectures if anyone will listen to a woman speak on scientific matters. It's not an easy path." "You don't sound enthusiastic," Wade observed. Abigail sighed. "The work excites me. The environment it exists in does not. There are so many barriers, so many men determined to remind me of my proper place." Wade was quiet for a moment. "And what about beyond work? Family, a husband?" "My parents are supportive in their way, though they worry about my prospects. As for marriage..." Abigail shook her head. "The men in my social circle want a wife, not a colleague. Someone to host their dinner parties and raise their children, not someone who disappears for months to study plants in remote territories." "Seems short-sighted of them," Wade commented. "To overlook what you really are for what they think you should be." His words warmed her more than any fire could have. "What about you?" she asked. "You've never spoken of returning to anywhere. Is there no place you consider home?" Wade stretched his long legs out before him, considering her question. "Home's a complicated notion for me," he finally said. "Places never seem to stick, but lately I've been thinking maybe home isn't a place at all." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Abigail's heart raced as Wade's hand found hers in the dimness, his fingers intertwining with her own. They sat in silence as the storm raged around them, neither willing to break the fragile moment with words that might prove inadequate. When the thunder finally receded and the rain slowed to a gentle patter, Abigail found herself drifting to sleep, her head resting against Wade's shoulder. His arm came around her, providing both warmth and comfort as she surrendered to exhaustion. "Rest," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you." And in that moment, despite the wilderness surrounding them and the uncertain future ahead, Abigail felt completely, perfectly safe. Morning dawned clear and brilliant after the storm, the desert landscape transformed by the rare gift of abundant water. Wildflowers that had been merely promising buds the day before had unfurled overnight, carpeting the normally arid ground in splashes of vibrant color. Abigail awakened to find herself still nestled against Wade, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She allowed herself a moment to study his face, relaxed and unguarded as it rarely was in waking hours. The lines of tension around his eyes had softened, making him look younger, more at peace. As if sensing her gaze, Wade's eyes opened, focusing immediately on her face. For a heartbeat, neither moved, caught in the simple intimacy of the moment. "Morning," he said softly, making no move to distance himself. "Good morning," she replied, equally reluctant to break their connection. "The rain has stopped." Wade nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "And brought gifts from the look of it." He nodded toward the wagon opening, where the brilliant wildflowers were visible in the distance. Abigail's eyes widened with delight. "Oh, I had no idea there were so many varieties dormant in the soil here. This is incredible." Wade's smile broadened at her enthusiasm. "Thought that might interest you more than coffee." They spent the day among the flowers, with Abigail working feverishly to document as many species as possible before they wilted in the returning heat. Wade helped, bringing her specimens and learning to press them properly under her guidance. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Abigail realized they had barely spoken all day, working in companionable silence, broken only by occasional questions or observations about the plants they were collecting. It struck her how comfortable they had become with each other, how natural it felt to share this space and time with him. "We should start back toward Prescott tomorrow," Wade said as they prepared their evening meal. "Your supplies are running low, and I expect you'll want to send your findings back to the university." Reality intruded on Abigail's contentment like a cold draft. "Yes, I suppose you're right," she agreed, trying to mask her disappointment. "I hadn't realized how quickly time was passing." Wade studied her across the campfire, his expression thoughtful. "We could continue afterward if you'd like. There are areas to the north that might interest you, different elevation, different plants." Hope sparked in Abigail's chest. "I would like that very much." Their journey back to Prescott took 3 days, during which a new awareness hummed between them. Nothing had been declared, no promises made, yet something had undeniably changed. Wade's hand would linger when helping her from the wagon. Abigail would find reasons to stand closer to him than strictly necessary. Each small touch, each shared glance, built upon the foundation of trust and respect they had established over the past weeks. The town appeared on the horizon late in the afternoon of the 3rd day, the sight filling Abigail with a curious mixture of relief and regret. She had missed certain comforts: a proper bath, fresh bread, a real bed, but she had also grown to love the simplicity of their life on the trail. "We'll stay at the hotel tonight," Wade decided as they approached town. "More comfortable for you than the boarding house, and they won't ask as many questions." Abigail nodded her agreement, appreciating his consideration. While she had meant what she said about being unconcerned with gossip, she was in no mood to face Mrs. Wilcox's interrogation after weeks away. The Palace Hotel was the finest establishment in Prescott, a 2-story stone building that catered to wealthy visitors and territorial officials. Heads turned when Wade and Abigail entered the lobby, their travel-worn appearance at odds with the polished surroundings. "We need 2 rooms," Wade informed the clerk, ignoring the man's barely concealed surprise. "Adjacent if possible." "Of course, Mr. Wade," the clerk replied, recognition flickering in his eyes. Apparently, Wade's reputation preceded him even here. "Will you and the lady be staying long just tonight?" Wade answered curtly. "We'll need hot water sent up for baths, and dinner in Miss Anderson's room at 7. Once settled in her room, a surprisingly luxurious space with actual wallpaper, and a 4-poster bed, Abigail indulged in the promised bath, washing away weeks of trail dust and savoring the sensation of being truly clean again. She unpacked her one good dress, slightly wrinkled but serviceable, and arranged her hair as best she could without a lady's maid. At precisely 7, a knock came at her door. Wade stood in the hallway, similarly transformed by clean clothes and a fresh shave. His dark hair was still damp from his bath, and he traded his trail-worn garments for a crisp white shirt and black vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes taking in the sight of her in the blue dress that matched her eyes. Abigail felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "As do you," she replied. "Handsome, I mean." A small smile quirked the corner of his mouth as he stepped into the room, followed by a hotel employee wheeling a cart laden with covered dishes. Once the food was arranged and the man had departed with a generous tip, Wade held Abigail's chair for her with old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with his rugged persona. They dined on roast beef, fresh vegetables, and apple pie luxuries after weeks of camp food. The wine Wade had ordered loosened their tongues, and conversation flowed easily between them, touching on subjects both light and serious. As the meal concluded, Wade leaned back in his chair, regarding Abigail with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I need to ride out tomorrow," he said. "Some business with the territorial marshal about those rustlers. Shouldn't take more than a couple of days. I'll use the time to organize my specimens and draft my report for the university," Abigail replied, trying to hide her disappointment at even this brief separation. Wade nodded, then reached across the table to take her hand. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "When I return, we should talk about what comes next." The simple statement carried the weight of promise, of possibilities that made Abigail's heart race. "I'd like that," she said softly. He stood then, still holding her hand, and drew her gently to her feet. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Abigail," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know." She placed her fingers lightly against his lips, stopping his declaration. "Tell me when you return," she whispered. "Give me these days to be sure of my own heart, though I think I already know its answer." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. With exquisite gentleness, he took her hand from his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, then to the inside of her wrist where her pulse beat rapidly beneath the skin. "Until then," he said, and with a final look that burned with promise, he left her room. Abigail slept poorly that night, her mind too full of Wade and the future that might await them. By morning, she had reached a decision that both terrified and exhilarated her. Whatever Wade proposed upon his return, she would suggest an alternative to her immediate return to Boston. The Arizona Territory held too many wonders botanical and otherwise for her to leave it behind so soon. The next 2 days passed in a blur of scientific documentation and practical arrangements. Abigail carefully packed her most important specimens for shipment to the university, along with detailed notes and sketches. She wrote a long letter to her department head, requesting an extension of her research period and outlining the valuable discoveries she had already made. On the evening of the second day, as she was finishing her work in her hotel room, an urgent knock came at her door. Expecting Wade, Abigail hurried to answer it, only to find a young boy of perhaps 12 standing in the hallway. "Miss Anderson?" the boy asked, his expression serious. "Yes, that's me." The boy thrust a folded note into her hands. "Mr. Sullivan at the marshal's office asked me to bring you this right away." Abigail thanked him with a coin, then closed the door and unfolded the note with a growing sense of foreboding. "Miss Anderson," it read in an unfamiliar hand, "I regret to inform you that Daniel Wade has been injured in the course of assisting with an arrest. He is at Doc Miller's office and asking for you. Please come at your earliest convenience. Deputy Marshal Sullivan, Fear clutched at Abigail's heart as she grabbed her shawl and hurried from the room, not bothering to change from her work clothes or even pin up her hair properly. The doctor's office was only 2 blocks from the hotel, and she ran the entire way, heedless of the stares from passers-by. The small building that served as Prescott's medical facility was dimly lit, a single lamp burning in the front window. Abigail burst through the door, her eyes scanning the waiting area frantically. "Miss Anderson." A middle-aged man in a blood-spattered apron emerged from a back room. "I'm Dr. Miller. You're here for Wade, I take it." "Yes," Abigail confirmed, her voice tight with fear. "How badly is he hurt?" The doctor's expression was grave but not despairing. "Took a bullet to the shoulder and another grazed his side. Lost a fair amount of blood, but he's tough as old leather, that one. If infection doesn't set in, he should recover." "Can I see him?" Abigail asked, already moving toward the door the doctor had emerged from. Dr. Miller nodded. "He's been asking for you. Stubborn as a mule. Wouldn't let me give him laudanum until you arrived." Wade lay on a narrow bed in a small, clean room that smelled strongly of carbolic acid and blood. His upper body was swathed in bandages, his normally tanned face pale against the white pillowcase. His eyes were closed, but they opened immediately when Abigail entered, focusing on her with evident relief. "You came," he said, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "Of course I came," Abigail replied, rushing to his side and taking his hand in both of hers. "What happened?" Wade attempted a shrug, then winced at the movement. "Rustlers put up more of a fight than expected. One had a hideout gun we didn't see, Doctor." Miller entered behind Abigail, a glass of murky liquid in his hand. "Now that your lady friend is here, will you finally take this laudanum? You need rest to heal." Wade's eyes never left Abigail's face. "Will you stay?" "I'm not going anywhere," she promised fervently. Satisfied with her answer, Wade allowed the doctor to help him drink the pain-relieving tincture. Within minutes, his eyelids began to droop as the medicine took effect. "We were supposed to talk," he murmured, fighting to stay awake. "About what comes next." Abigail squeezed his hand gently. "We will, when you're stronger." "No," Wade insisted, his words slurring slightly. "Need to say it now, in case." "Don't," Abigail interrupted, her voice breaking. "Don't speak as if you might not recover." Wade managed a weak smile. "Not planning on dying, Abigail. But a man shouldn't leave important things unsaid." He took a labored breath. "I love you. Have since you stood in that boarding house dining room and told me you weren't afraid of gossip." Tears filled Abigail's eyes at the simple declaration. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling simultaneously momentous and entirely natural. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake." Wade's eyes closed, his features relaxing as the laudanum pulled him into sleep. Abigail sat beside him, still holding his hand as doctor. Miller checked his bandages once more. "You should get some rest yourself, Miss Anderson," the doctor advised. "He'll likely sleep through the night with that dose I gave him." Abigail shook her head firmly. "I promised I would stay." The doctor studied her face, then nodded in understanding. "I'll have my wife bring you some tea and a blanket. The chair's not comfortable, but it's the best I can offer." "Thank you," Abigail said sincerely. "And thank you for taking care of him." Dr. Miller's expression softened. "He's done a lot of good for this town in his quiet way. Folks around here respect Wade, even if he keeps to himself most times." He paused at the door. "Must be quite a woman to capture the heart of a lone wolf like him." Abigail smiled despite her worry. "He captured mine just as thoroughly, Doctor." The night passed slowly, with Abigail dozing fitfully in the hard chair, waking at every sound to check on Wade. His sleep was restless at times, pain breaking through the medication in waves that caused him to mutter and shift. Each time, Abigail would smooth his hair back from his forehead and speak softly until he settled again. Dawn was breaking when Wade finally opened his eyes, awareness returning gradually as the laudanum wore off. He blinked several times, then focused on Abigail with a clarity that relieved her immensely. "You're still here," he observed, his voice rough from sleep and pain. "I said I would be," she reminded him, reaching for the water glass the doctor's wife had left. She helped him drink, supporting his head with gentle hands. "Thank you," he said when he had finished, settling back against the pillows. He studied her face intently. "Did I dream it, or did I tell you I love you last night?" A smile bloomed across Abigail's face. "You did. And I told you the same." "Good," Wade replied, a hint of his usual quiet humor returning. Wasn't sure if that was the laudanum talking. Dr. Miller entered then, carrying fresh bandages and medicines. "Ah, you're awake. How's the pain this morning?" "Manageable," Wade answered, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. The doctor harumphed skeptically. "Let's have a look at those wounds." Abigail moved to leave the room, but Wade caught her hand. "Stay," he requested, "unless it bothers you." "I've assisted with field surgeries during my expeditions," she assured him. "I'm not squeamish." With Abigail's help, Dr. Miller changed Wade's bandages, cleaning the wounds and applying fresh poultices. The bullet wound in his shoulder was angry and red, but showed no signs of the dreaded infection that claimed so many gunshot victims. The graze along his ribs was less serious, already beginning to heal at the edges. "You're a lucky man, Wade," the doctor pronounced when he had finished. "Few inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Wade's eyes found Abigail's. "I've been thinking the same thing myself lately." Over the next week, Abigail barely left Wade's side as he recovered first in the doctor's office, and then, when he was strong enough to be moved, in a room at the Palace Hotel. She read to him, helped change his bandages, and ensured he ate properly to regain his strength. Their relationship deepened during this time of enforced closeness, with conversations that ranged from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Wade spoke more openly than ever before, sharing stories of his time in the cavalry, his wanderings after the war, and the events that had shaped him into the man he had become. In turn, Abigail revealed her own struggles, her battle for recognition in scientific circles, her parents' gentle but persistent pressure to pursue a more conventional life, her fear that she would have to choose between her work and the possibility of love and family. "You shouldn't have to choose," Wade said one evening as they sat together by the window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Not with the right partner." Abigail turned to look at him, hope blossoming in her chest. "What are you saying, Daniel?" It was the first time she had used his given name, and a slow smile spread across his face at the sound of it on her lips. "I'm saying that I've been alone a long time, and I was content with that, until I met you. Now, I can't imagine going back to that life." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses she had developed during their weeks in the field, badges of her dedication that he seemed to treasure rather than deplore. "I'm not a wealthy man," he continued, "but I have some land north of here. Good water, good grazing. Been thinking of settling down, raising horses. It's beautiful country, lots of different plants for a botanist to study." Abigail's heart raced as she began to understand what he was proposing. "It sounds wonderful." "It could be," Wade agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "With you there. We could build something together, Abigail, a home, a life. You could continue your research, write your books and papers. I'd help however I could." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you need to return to Boston." I'd understand if Abigail silenced him with a finger against his lips, just as she had that night before he left. "Boston has nothing for me that compares to what I've found here," she said softly. "Nothing that compares to you." Relief and joy transformed Wade's features. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner, my heart." Tears of happiness spilled down Abigail's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Wade pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of his still healing wounds, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the man he truly was beneath the rugged exterior. Abigail melted into him, finally allowing herself to believe that this unexpected love, born in danger and nurtured through shared purpose, was real and lasting. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Prescott. Dr. Miller stood as Wade's witness, while the doctor's wife, Margaret, who had become a dear friend to Abigail during Wade's convalescence, served as hers. The territorial judge officiated, beaming at the couple who had become something of a local legend, the Eastern botanist and the lone wolf tracker, who had found love amid the wilderness. Abigail wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Wade had insisted on purchasing for her, despite her protests about the extravagance. "A woman should feel beautiful on her wedding day," he had said firmly, brooking no argument. Wade himself cut an impressive figure in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion and his gray eyes bright with happiness as he watched Abigail walk toward him down the short aisle. The vows they exchanged were traditional in wording but profound in meaning for both of them, promises of fidelity, respect, and partnership that they had already begun to fulfill during their time together. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Abigail with a gentle reverence that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic attendees. It was a kiss that spoke of coming home after a long journey, of finding peace after years of searching. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held at the hotel where the couple had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. Friends and acquaintances from town joined them for a meal and dancing, with Wade surprising everyone, including Abigail, with his graceful movements despite his still healing shoulder. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Abigail asked as he guided her smoothly across the floor. A hint of mischief glinted in his eyes. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper manners, even out here in the territories. Said we might be ranchers, but we didn't have to be uncultured." "I wish I could have met her," Abigail said softly. Wade's expression grew tender. "She would have loved you," he assured her. "Strong, smart women always got along well in our family." As the evening drew to a close, Wade led Abigail out onto the hotel's balcony, away from the noise and well wishes of their guests. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the velvet darkness that only the western sky could produce. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed out at the sleeping town. "Completely," Abigail assured him, leaning into his solid warmth. "Though I can scarcely believe how much my life has changed in just a few months. If that stampede hadn't happened." Wade shook his head. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." Coming from a practical man like Wade, the romantic sentiment carried special weight. Abigail turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "For a man who claims not to be good with words, you certainly know how to say the right ones," she teased. Wade caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Only with you," he said. "You make me want to try." The journey to Wade's land took 3 days, traveling in a new wagon loaded with supplies for their new life together. Abigail watched in fascination as the landscape changed around them, the high desert giving way to pine forests and small meadows as they gained elevation. Almost there, Wade announced late on the third afternoon, pointing to a distant ridge. Home is just beyond that rise. The word home sent a thrill through Abigail. After years of boarding houses, university accommodations, and temporary field camps, the concept of a permanent place one shared with the man she loved was both novel and deeply appealing. As they crested the ridge, the view opened up before them, stealing Abigail's breath. A small valley spread out below, cradled by forested hills and bisected by a clear, rushing stream. Wildflowers dotted the open meadows, and a stand of aspen trees shimmered silver green in the late afternoon light. Near the center of the valley, situated on a gentle rise overlooking the stream, stood a cabin sturdy and well-built, with a wide porch and windows that caught the golden glow of the setting sun. "Daniel," Abigail breathed, unable to find adequate words for the beauty before her. Wade's arm tightened around her shoulders. "When I bought this land 5 years ago, I thought it would just be a place to rest between jobs," he said quietly. "Never imagined it would become a true home until I met you." He guided the wagon down the sloping trail toward the cabin, pointing out features of the property as they went: the natural spring that provided clean water year-round, the meadows where he planned to graze horses, the sunny slopes where Abigail might establish gardens for both food and her botanical specimens. As they approached the cabin, Abigail saw that it was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with a main structure of squared logs and a newer addition extending from the back. "I've been working on it whenever I could these past few years," Wade explained, noting her interest. "Added the extra rooms last summer, though I didn't know then who I was building them for." He brought the wagon to a halt before the front porch and jumped down, coming around to help Abigail descend. Instead of simply offering his hand, however, he lifted her completely off the seat and into his arms. "Daniel," she exclaimed, laughing in surprise. "Your shoulder is fine," he assured her, carrying her up the steps. "Tradition says I should carry my bride across the threshold, and I intend to honor it." With Abigail cradled against his chest, Wade pushed open the cabin door and stepped inside. The interior was simple but surprisingly comfortable: a large main room with a stone fireplace, furnished with solid wooden pieces that spoke of craftsmanship rather than luxury. Bookshelves lined one wall, currently half empty but promising space for Abigail's scientific volumes and the books Wade had admitted to collecting during his travels. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wade," he said softly, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Abigail looked up at her husband, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude for this man and the life he was offering her. "It's perfect," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Absolutely perfect." In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into their new life together with surprising ease. Wade taught Abigail to ride properly, as he had promised during their first expedition, and she proved an apt pupil. Soon, she was confidently exploring the surrounding countryside on her gentle mare, discovering botanical treasures that had her filling notebook after notebook with observations and sketches. For his part, Wade began the work of establishing their horse ranch, building corrals and acquiring their first breeding stock: 2 magnificent stallions and a half-dozen quality mares. He also continued his occasional work as a tracker and guide, though he was more selective now about the jobs he accepted, choosing only those that wouldn't keep him from home for extended periods. They developed a rhythm to their days: early mornings spent together, then each to their own work until evening, when they would reunite over dinner to share the events of their day. Nights were for more intimate connection, as they continued to discover each other with the same wonder and appreciation that had marked their initial attraction. Abigail wrote regularly to her colleagues at the university, sending carefully documented specimens and detailed reports on the flora of the region. To her surprise and delight, her work began to gain recognition in scientific circles, with several of her papers published in respected journals. "They've invited me to present at the National Botanical Society meeting next spring," she told Wade one evening, holding the letter that had arrived with their monthly supply wagon. In Philadelphia, Wade looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "That's wonderful news," he said sincerely. "You deserve the recognition." Abigail bit her lip, studying his face. "It would mean being away for at least a month," she said hesitantly. "The journey east and back, plus the conference itself." Wade set aside his work and crossed to where she sat, taking her hands in his. "Abigail, I meant what I said before we married. Your work is important not just to you, but to science. Of course you should go." Relief washed over her at his understanding. "You could come with me," she suggested hopefully. "See the East, meet my family." A shadow crossed Wade's face. "I'm not sure Boston society is ready for someone like me," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "They'd better be," Abigail replied firmly, "because you're part of who I am now, and I won't pretend otherwise for anyone's comfort, not even my parents'." Wade's expression softened as he cupped her face in his hands. "We've got months before you need to decide," he reminded her. "For now, let's celebrate your success properly." He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of pride and passion in equal measure, and all thoughts of Boston faded from Abigail's mind. When spring arrived the following year, Abigail did indeed travel east for the conference, but not alone. Wade accompanied her, facing the crowded cities and formal society with the same quiet courage he brought to every challenge. He stood proudly at her side as she presented her findings, charmed her mother with his courteous manners, and even managed to find common ground with her skeptical father during a long conversation about the practical applications of her botanical discoveries. "Your young man is not what I expected," her father admitted to Abigail the night before they were to return west. "But I can see why you chose him. He looks at you the way a man should look at his wife, with respect as well as affection." It was high praise from the reserved New England professor, and Abigail treasured it as they began their journey home. Home, the word had taken on new meaning now. No longer Boston with its brick buildings and cultured society, but a log cabin in a high mountain valley where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, and the man she loved waited for her each day. The years flowed by, each season bringing new joys and occasional challenges. Wade's horse breeding business thrived, his animals developing a reputation for intelligence and endurance that attracted buyers from as far away as California. Abigail's botanical research continued to earn recognition, and she began work on a comprehensive guide to medicinal plants of the Southwest that would eventually become a standard reference text. In their third year of marriage, Abigail discovered she was expecting a child, news that both delighted and terrified her. Wade's response was one of unalloyed joy, his usual reserve dissolving completely as he lifted her in a careful embrace and spun her around their cabin. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child, Abigail." His enthusiasm helped calm her fears about balancing motherhood with her scientific work. As her body changed and the baby grew within her, Wade proved an attentive and supportive husband, taking on additional household duties without being asked and ensuring she had everything she needed for comfort. Their son, William Daniel Wade, was born on a crisp autumn day with Dr. Miller in attendance, having made the journey from Prescott specifically for the birth. The moment Wade held his son for the first time, tears unashamedly tracking down his weathered cheeks, Abigail fell in love with him all over again. "He has your eyes," Wade whispered, sitting beside her on the bed as their newborn son nursed contentedly. "Those beautiful blue eyes." Abigail smiled tiredly, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "And your chin, I think, that determined set." Together they watched their child, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features, at the miracle they had created between them. It was a moment of pure joy, unshadowed by the trials they had faced or the challenges that might lie ahead. William Billy, to his adoring parents, grew into a sturdy, curious child who inherited his father's quiet confidence and his mother's insatiable thirst for knowledge. By the age of 5, he could identify dozens of plants by both their common and scientific names, ride his pony with surprising skill, and read far beyond the level expected for his age. "He's going to need more education than we can provide here," Abigail acknowledged one evening as they watched their son laboriously copying botanical drawings at the kitchen table. Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Prescott has a good school now," he said, "and it's growing all the time. Maybe in a few years." The conversation was one they returned to periodically as Billy continued to grow and their family expanded with the arrival of a daughter, Eliza Margaret, named for both their mothers. With 2 children to consider, the isolated beauty of their valley occasionally seemed a mixed blessing, offering freedom and safety, but limited opportunities for education and social interaction. The solution presented itself unexpectedly when Abigail was offered a position as a visiting lecturer at the newly established Territorial College in Prescott. The appointment would require her presence in town only 3 days a week during the academic term, a schedule that could accommodate both her research and her family responsibilities. After much discussion, they decided to maintain both homes, the beloved ranch where they would spend summers and weekends, and a comfortable house in Prescott where the children could attend school and Abigail could fulfill her teaching duties. It was not always an easy balance to maintain, but they managed it together, as they had managed every challenge since that fateful day when Wade had swept Abigail from the path of a stampede and onto his horse. They faced each new development as partners, their love deepening with shared experiences and mutual respect. As they approached their 20th wedding anniversary, with Billy away at university in California and Eliza preparing to follow in his footsteps the following year, Abigail found Wade standing on the porch of their valley home, gazing out at the land that had witnessed their life together. "Any regrets?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist and leaning against his still solid frame. Wade looked down at her, the years having added silver to his dark hair and new lines around his eyes, but none of it diminishing the love that shone in his gaze when it rested on her. "Not a single one," he answered, drawing her closer. "Every choice, every path that led me to you and the life we've built, I'd make them all again." Abigail smiled, her heart as full as it had been on the day they wed. "As would I," she assured him. "Every step, every moment." They stood together as the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in the same golden hues that had welcomed them home so many years before. The stampede that had nearly ended Abigail's life had instead given her everything she could have wished for: a love as vast as the western sky, a family that brought immeasurable joy, and a partnership that had allowed both of them to become more together than they ever could have been apart. In the gathering dusk, Wade bent to kiss his wife with the same tenderness he had shown her from the beginning. And Abigail knew, with the certainty that came from years of shared love and trust, that whatever the future might hold, they would face it as they had faced everything else together, side by side, their hearts beating in perfect harmony.